Good afternoon, it's Tuesday the 31st of July 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Last day of July. Where has that month gone?
Indeed. Well, look, yesterday we were talking about disinformation and the Disinformation and Fake News Interim Report from the House of Commons Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee. I thought we'd take a slightly broader look at the situation. They, of course, were the points we highlighted from this yesterday were, that they were going to make tech companies responsible and liable for content on their platforms. They're going to impose a levy on tech companies to fund education and the Information Commissioner's Office. Well, that we'll come on to in a little bit more detail in a second. They were going to change the rules on political campaigning, Competition and Markets Authority to audit fake accounts on these platforms. And they're going to create what they were describing as a digital Atlantic Charter. Well, it's the education aspect of this, imposing a levy on tech companies to fund education. Well, in fact, the education aspect of this is already well in hand because, was it back in June, Press Gazette here and others reporting that the Times and the Sunday Times had announced the launch of a free media literacy program that would teach children how to spot fake news. So this is News UK, who are the owners of the Times and the Sunday Times, saying that this program is the first of its kind in the UK and will be available to all secondary schools, colleges and sixth form. Students would be exposed to real stories, research and investigations by journalists at the Times and the Sunday Times, and that they will learn how to navigate and think critically about the news they consume and what sources they trust. So that's already been launched in this country. Well, in fact, there's a whole organisation behind this. This is the Journal of Media Literacy Education, which is published by the National Association for Media Literacy Education. And their vision is to see media literacy be highly valued by all and widely practiced as an essential skill for the 21st century. So that's fantastic stuff. Well, I should point out that Reuters partners with the National Association for Media Literacy Education whenever the Media Literacy Week happens, which is in November. These days is an annual thing. Now, we'll come back onto Thomson Reuters in a little moment, but let's make the point that this is not just a UK issue, because here's Slate and a headline from May this year. A new programme has helped bring better media literacy to the Ukraine. Well, yes, it has, because they have, they're pointing out that this NGO called UKR Media has set up a media literacy school in Ukraine. And whoever does best at the media literacy school will be awarded with an internship at UATV, which is the Ukrainian state news agency. And of course, we have highlighted that in the past that the BBC is well into this sort of stuff with BBC Media Action, because they like to push training of journalists and set media agendas in other countries. This article from the UK Column website, BBC Media Action, Subversion from Broadcasting House to Kazakhstan. And in this article, we make the point that the BBC had moved into Syria, for example, in 2004. And had begun a process of undermining the Syrian government there. And of course, let's mention Thomson Reuters Foundation, because they play the same types of games. And of course, we still have the question of what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing. The former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson suggesting that she was training journalists, her family, and Thomson Reuters Foundation saying that she wasn't. But of course, at one point, she had been working for BBC Media Action in a project management role. And then there's Andy Pryce. Now, I can't show you a picture of Andy Pryce. He's head of counter-disinformation at the Foreign Commonwealth Office. We can't show you a picture of Andy Pryce because apparently he is a secret squirrel and we're not allowed to know anything about him. I've asked through Freedom of Information for some details about Andy Pryce and his job, and the Foreign Commonwealth Office at this point has told me to go away. There's an internal review process which is now overdue. So the Foreign and Commonwealth Office absolutely refusing to give information about Andy Pryce. But in fact, his job is not just head of counter-disinformation. Well, we'll come on to that in a second. Just want to make the point that he works in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia Directorate. And that directorate oversees UK policy and the UK contribution to broader Western policies in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, which Kazakhstan being the feature of that BBC Media Action article, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine and Uzbekistan. And it supports cross-government policy making and delivery and oversees the networks of UK embassies and consultancies, and consulates in these countries. Now, as I say, Andy Pryce's title is not just head of counter-disinformation. We've got to add this bit on because his full title includes and media development on the end. So is this the government, or the government now getting involved in the same types of activities as BBC Media Action? Well, let me bring this one back. Before we get onto this, just point this out. This is an Express article. You notice, by the way, that we've put the word reach at the top there, Brian, and that, of course, is because Express, part of this media conglomerate now that calls itself the largest media organisation in Britain, called Reach, formerly Trinity Mirror Group, but then they've bought the Express newspapers. So UK using graphic videos in war of words with Putin is the headline on this. This is from April this year. It's highlighted Andy Pryce and his role in the creation of a series of videos which were apparently to counter disinformation. One video asks 6 questions that Putin's Russia has so far failed to answer, this article says. These include, is Russia committed to an international rules-based system as a P5 member? Why hasn't Russia declared its Novichok program to the Chemical Weapons Convention? Why does Russia persistently cover up the use of chemical weapons in Assad's brutal regime in Syria? So this is the type of propaganda that Andy Pryce is putting out. But let's get back to this article here. A new program has helped bring better media literacy to Ukraine. And the question in my mind is, could Andy Pryce be involved in this project? And I think it is very, very likely. Back in March this year, Andy Pryce took part in a bilateral working meeting with the head of sector for strategic communications in the Ministry of Information Policy of Ukraine. This meeting took place in London. They discussed the current situation with the dissemination of Russian propaganda, as they described it in Europe, including Ukraine and the Baltic states, and stressed the need to intensify Ukrainian-British cooperation in terms of combating propaganda with the active participation of Ukrainian NGOs as well. Well, that's exactly what's going on in Ukraine with this media education program. Ukrainian NGOs dealing with the fake news, Russian propaganda in Ukraine. Andy Pryce has spoken at a number of events held by this lot, the European Endowment for Democracy, which say that they are a grant-giving organisation that supports local actors of democratic change in European neighbourhood and beyond. This is a European Commission initiative originally set up in 2013 to support how they've been described, to support political parties, trade unions and journalists by giving them access to funds in a direct and less bureaucratic way. Does that mean that there's less paperwork involved? That maybe we can't follow the money quite so easily? I suspect that's exactly the case. Last September, the subject that Andy Pryce was discussing at one of their events was how the donor community can best assist independent media. Now, of course, independent media in this case doesn't mean alternative media. It's that use of the word independent again, and it means media supported by Western governments and Western elites and so on, independent of nation states that we don't like so much. He was speaking at an event from here as well in April, run by the EU Disinfo Lab and the Atlantic Council. So this is NATO, in other words. So there seems to be a picture building here, Brian. It's not a very nice one. I believe what they're aiming for is full spectrum dominance of the narrative, if we can call it that. And perhaps this Of course, this from April, I think it was April or May, when the G7 were meeting, I can't remember exactly, when Theresa May announced the new rapid response mechanism, which was all about coordinated attribution of hostile activity and joint work to assert a common narrative and response across all G7 nations. And I think we're seeing that beginning to build. This common narrative infrastructure is building. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office is involved in it in Eastern Europe and other parts of the world. And we've got mainstream media in this country involved in it to educate people on what is real news and what is fake news in this country. And we have the digital, the DCMS committee producing reports, providing suggestions to government, strong suggestions about how to move forward to deal with this issue. This is an attempt to build full spectrum dominance of the narrative.
Completely, Mike, and I'll say that I was able to watch the UK column news yesterday while I was at home, and my thought was that yesterday's news was the most important UK column news that has gone out to date, because this subject is so serious. There are several people in our chat box talking at the moment about the rise of the Ministry of Truth, and I think this is exactly where we are. The government is terrified that its propaganda programme is coming undone. Anybody who dares to criticise the British government at the moment, anybody who raises a completely reasonable issue, who puts evidence forward to say that the British government is not telling the truth, for example, that is a major threat to this full spectrum dominance, as you describe it. And we need to remind ourselves that, of course, going back a couple of years, we had demos going into schools in order to teach children how to read the news properly, which news sources to trust. We've got embedded BBC journalists into local newspapers, except there aren't any local newspapers. We're dealing with the Reach conglomerate. So what we've got is a massive British government propaganda machine. They've invested billions of pounds into it, but now people are beginning to see through it. And of course, that is immensely dangerous for the government. The truth is dangerous for the British government, and they've got to do everything they can to close all the doors. So they don't want to tell you about this man? No, of course not, because if the details of him and his job come to the surface, we can absolutely see how this propaganda machine works.
Yes. Immensely
dangerous.
Well, let's go back to Reach. This is actually the Daily Star, but of course that's part of the Reach group. This is a perfect example of the type of propaganda that Britain is being exposed to at the moment. Brexit STD warning, super-gonorrhea to spread more easily when UK leaves EU. So apparently we're all going to get sexually transmitted diseases much more easily once we have Brexited. This is just the most unbelievable piece of disinformation. What is the young journalist Charlotte saying? She's saying post-Brexit Britain is under significant threat from diseases unless the government can work out a way to maintain a close working relationship with the European health bodies. The UK's proximity to mainland Europe with high levels of cross-border travel on the continent mean that without a closely joined up approach, the results could be disastrous. Tracking outbreaks requires collaboration between the UK and the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. Public Health England worked alongside the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and the World Health Organization to effectively track the infection. She is hinting that the fact that Public Health England may possibly, maybe, perhaps not be working so closely with the ECDC after Brexit is going to mean that we're all going to die of super-gonorrhea. It is spectacular. I just wanted to put Charlotte Ikonen on the screen here. She is another example of what Patrick and I were talking about on yesterday's programme. One of these so-called journalists, clearly straight out of university, has no experience whatsoever, and probably has, unfortunately for her, some kind of requirement to produce X number of articles every day, and this is the result of it, because there's clearly been no thought put into this article whatsoever.
Mike, this is really outrageous, because of course if UK column or alternative media was to come out with this as a story, then we would have everybody, the Telegraph, the Times, the Guardian, pounding on our door that this was outrageous fake news by alternate media. Here we've got it pushed forward by the red tops, and we are supposed to believe this story is true. This has got to be a completely fabricated story. It's little pieces of information put together but out of context. So what is this story designed to do? Really have us believe that Brexit is going to mean that everybody's going to go down with super-gonorrhea. Is this real? Well, apparently it is for mainstream press.
Yes.
Well, it gets worse because let's have a look at the latest onslaught against Facebook. And apparently now Facebook is putting children's lives at risk by reviving spurious MMR claims, says UK health chiefs. This is from the Telegraph. Read a little bit for you here. Facebook is putting children's lives at risk by reviving those spurious MMR claims. The anti-vaccination sites which promote the fake science that caused a surge in measles cases, as well as conspiracy theories about other vaccines, appear at the top of searches when parents use Facebook to find information about MMR vaccine or other vaccines. Unlike Google, which filters out anti-vaccine sites to promote guidance from the NHS, government or World Health Organization, Facebook searches appear to be based solely on their most popular and active sites, irrespective of whether they're peddling false information. The biggest anti-vaccination sites have more than 100,000 followers. So some really fascinating information there, Mike, that apparently Facebook is responsible for a surge in measles cases. But we now know that Google is simply a mouthpiece of the NHS and the government and the World Health Organization, because that's the only information that Google's going to permit.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's follow this story through. This is some of the quotes in the article. We've got Helen Stokes-Lampard, chair of the Royal College of GPs. She said it's deeply concerning that Facebook was carrying posts that spread false and frankly dangerous ideas about not just MMR, but other vaccination programs. Well, we'll have a look at her in a bit more detail, but we've got this. The consequences of publishing misleading information is a genuine risk to the public's health. You only have to look at the widespread panic and confusion that was caused by unfounded claims by Dr. Wakefield linking the MMR vaccine to autism in the 1970s. 1990s. And she goes on, it meant a sizable cohort of 20-somethings were unprotected from potentially life-threatening diseases, with a surge of more than 600 measles cases in England this year alone, a disease we were on the brink of eradicating and which can have life-changing consequences. So she's not worried about super-gonorrhea. It's measles, which is the problem. No evidence to support her statements are given in the article whatsoever. She's just quoted. You can have a look at her Twitter page. It's always good to go to these people's Twitter pages to see what else they're talking about. But we can see she's chair of the RCGP, GP Litchfield, former head of GP teaching at Birmingham University. She says, I care passionately. She's 100% busy, 100% enthusiastic. So doesn't sleep at all, Mike, 100% she's giving to this. But this embedded tweet here caught my eye. I was fascinated by this. She retweeted the GMC. We're pleased to announce that Dame Claire Marks has been appointed by the Privy Council as our new chair to succeed Professor Sir Terence Stevenson in January 2019. Now, I don't know much about Claire Marks, but I'm interested that a secret organisation, the Privy Council, has appointed her. So clearly she's going to be following the government line because they gave her the job in the first place. But on it goes. We've got this lady quoted in the article as well. Shirley Kramer, Chief Executive of the Royal Society for Public Health. She demanded urgent action by Facebook, saying its own research, due later this year, showed parents were more likely to see negative and often inaccurate messages about vaccinations on social media than positive ones. So my goodness, they are going for it. Could this be that all of the information coming to the surface about vaccines is beginning to hit home, Mike? I suspect it is. So let's have a look at this Royal Society for Public Health. Good idea to have a look at the board and trustees. Haven't got time in the news today to go through the lot, but the president here is Lord Hunt of King's Heath. Lord Hunt of King's Heath was Minister of State at the Department of Energy and Climate Change until the recent change of government. He was also Deputy Leader of the House of Lords. So the government fully embedded in this organisation. This is not independent in any way. What are they up to? Well, this is what they say. RSPH is the longest established public health organisation in the UK. It is incorporated by a royal charter and its patrons Her Majesty the Queen. Through its policy work, membership, community, qualifications, training and accreditation services, it educates, empowers and supports communities and individuals to live healthily. So we couldn't do that without that organisation. Don't worry, embedded with the government. Trust us is what they're saying. So here's Shirley Kramer. What does she have to say about herself? Well, she's an experienced voluntary sector leader in both the UK and the USA and has held non-executive positions in both countries in the public and voluntary sectors. Pretty busy woman. Yeah. I don't know how she manages this. She was Chief Executive Dyslexia Action, the UK's leading independent provider of services. She was Interim Chief Executive of Alzheimer's Research UK, working on Dementia Challenge. She's Chair of think tank British Future. So this lady is quasi-politically involved, to my mind. I don't think she's independent at all. She chairs the People in UK Public Health Advisory Group, providing independent expert advice to 4 UK countries on an overarching strategy for a multidisciplinary public health workforce. And she's got a degree in social work. So no expertise there, qualifications with regard to vaccines, but my goodness, she's got an opinion. And it's interesting that appears to tie in with the government's opinion. So this is one of their projects. This caught my eye. RSPH and the Young Health Movement are calling for action from government, social media companies and policymakers to help promote the positive aspects of social media for young people. These recommendations include introduction of a pop-up heavy usage warning on social media, including the support from young people for each of these recommendations. And the second one I thought was utterly brilliant: social media platforms to identify users who could be suffering from mental health problems by their posts and discreetly signpost.
Wow! So we're going to troll through Twitter data and attempt to use some kind of algorithm to decide whether somebody's mentally ill or not, and if they are, we'll pass that along to the multi-agency response teams who may well pick them up off the street and stick a needle in their bum.
Well, this is where it's heading, Mike, without any question. But some sort of AI system is going to be reading your posts, make a decision that you're not well. The first thing it's going to do is send you a discreet little message, maybe, to suggest that the computer thinks you're mentally ill. That's going to have quite an effect on some people. But as you say, where does the information go? So let's focus on the tremendous journalism carried out by the man who wrote the article, Charles Hymas, journalist, ex-Sunday Times head of news education, ex-director UCL media relations, author of a guide to the national curriculum. So this man's very, very keen on education. What's he got to say in the article? Well, when it gets near to what other people think about vaccines, there's no proper argument put forward at all. This is one. The site also makes unfounded claim that the HPV vaccine is destroying the lives of little girls and now boys after the government's recent announcement that the vaccine will be given to boys. He goes on, Truth About Vaccines carries an alarmist report about a mother whose baby was injected with MMR vaccine and died a minute later. There is no evidence the vaccine was to blame, but instead poor handling and refrigeration of it by medical staff is suspected and is under police investigation. You notice the callous statement there. It was an alarmist report. The baby died. It's just a bit of alarm. It was only really a refrigeration problem, Mike. But no proper investigative journalism. What I'm delighted to say is when you had a look on his Twitter page, members of the public were already in there picking this man up. So we've got a lady, Susan Elizabeth. What did she have to say? What every lazy-ass mainstream journalist tells us, the Lancet study said, versus what is actually said. So she's picking up on the report about Dr. Wakefield. And underneath, I would suggest that Telegraph is putting lives at risk by reporting propaganda which can lead to more families suffering brain injury from vaccines. Hundreds of thousands of families now. So the public getting in there and picking these people up, but I think we come back, Mike, to why they desperately need to try and close down social media, because it's getting too accurate, too well informed.
We intended to have this on yesterday's programme, but we ran out of time, I'm afraid. But safety measures apparently at Dawn Sturgess' funeral. Now, of course, Dawn Sturgess, one of the two people affected by the most recent so-called Novichok poisoning in Amesbury. So she was buried yesterday, Brian. No pallbearers.
No pallbearers, Mike. I got to say that the fantasy goes on with no disrespect to this lady. We accept she's died. The circumstances we don't accept. Just have a look at this. This is incredible. Novichok victim Dawn Sturgess' coffin was already in place when mourners arrived at her funeral and had no pallbearers, as a number of safety measures were put in place to protect the public. So the coffin mysteriously just appears in place. This is to protect the public. Let's have a look at what was said here. Public Health England has been liaising with the funeral directors to prevent possible contamination. The vicar taking the service, the Reverend Phil Bromley, told the Telegraph. It is part and parcel of the advice to make sure everyone attending is as safe as possible. I have every confidence that Public Health England and the crematorium know what they're doing. I'm assuming the coffin, will be transported in somehow, he added. But he said he did not know whether special protective clothing would be worn by those carrying it in. Well, let's think about this. If the people carrying it in needed protective clothing, that would mean that the coffin and the body posed a severe risk of contamination, which means that anybody in proximity to the coffin, those attending the funeral, would also be at risk. So which was it? Was it carried in by people in protective clothing, in which case those present at the funeral were placed at risk? Or was it carried in without protective clothing, in which case there was no risk at all to the coffin, in which case why couldn't pallbearers have brought it in? The story is fabricated nonsense. They are desperate to continue this fantasy of the poisoning and the risk to the public. Surprised they didn't say it wasn't wiped down with baby wipes, Mike.
It's a pretty cynical use of somebody's funeral, isn't it?
It's incredible. It's incredible. And the reason the stories are so strange is, of course, nobody can tell the truth around what's actually happened. And therefore, we're getting these nonsense little sound bites that tell us something is seriously wrong. And where is the fundamental story coming from? This is propaganda and disinformation direct from the British government, which seeks to control everybody challenging it. Well, is it going to get worse? Maybe the British Army gave us a hint, and thank you very much to the person who spotted this one. A little embedded video in the British Army's Twitter page, and let's just play it on screen. It says protect the UK, and very quickly it added support the police.
Right.
Let's just have a look at that again. Whoops, sorry, come back. Just come back through. Here we are.
Highly trained and deployed.
supporting the
ready to
police,
serve.
ready to serve. So we're just fascinated that at this critical time where many of us feel that the aim of the deep state is to create unrest in the country, we've got the British Army gently dropping in that part of their role is to support the police.
And we're seeing more imagery of military and police working together. Is that part of this?
Well, I went a little bit deeper than that, Mike. I found it interesting that the picture of the policeman there, of course, is not one of the paramilitary police all in black with balaclava and helmet. At least he's got his soft hat on, so there's a little bit of softness about the. But of course, where would we expect the army to be called in to support those thuggish, black-helmeted paramilitary British police that have been trained up? But maybe there's a message here that hasn't yet broken out into the wider press. Now, I gave you a sneak preview, but this is thank you to the people that highlighted another video clip. This is black humour. Perhaps not even that, but it's the Metropolitan Police that have made a little video clip to warn people about banking fraud and the way that fraudsters can take money from you. So in the first instance, you can say that there's some sense in this. This is part of the video, which I found very interesting. Credit cards have changed the way we live, making money easily accessible and improving our lifestyle.
Good.
So, according to the Metropolitan Police, the international banking cartel making money out of nothing and drawing people into massive debt and destroying their lives, this is actually a good thing and it's changing the way we live for the better. But it says alongside this there is a growing problem of bank fraud with often devastating consequences for the innocent victims that fall prey to these crimes. And what they then give is 3 examples of the way fraudsters can sort of turn up at your door or give you a call on the telephone. It's a shame that the Metropolitan Police don't seem as concerned about the massive billion-pound frauds going on inside the banks themselves, resulting in people losing their homes, businesses, and even taking their own lives. So a little bit of cynicism there, but thank you very much to the person who sent that through.
Well, the Home Office has issued a prospectus. Sorry, I'll try that again. The Home Office has issued a prospectus for the Early Intervention Youth Fund. This is to finance projects to encourage young people away from serious violence, and will be supported by the government after the Home Secretary has announced the doubling of the Early Intervention Youth Fund. So this is a scheme which opened for bidding yesterday. It's a key commitment in the serious violence strategy. Now, when I read the title of these strategy documents and so on, the titles generally can be read 2 ways. This isn't the prevention of serious violence strategy, Brian. This is the serious violence strategy. So I leave people to decide what that means. As I say, the government is going to double its funding, which was originally set at £11 million. It's now £22 million of Home Office money, which is going to be made available to support vital early intervention work. They're saying the scheme, which opened for bids yesterday, is a key commitment to the serious violence strategy and will allow communities to intervene early in the lives of more vulnerable young people. Doubling the funding apparently is going to allow successful police and crime commissioners and local partners to plan their work over the next 2 years and maximise its impact in expanding the existing programmes, developing innovative new schemes, or drawing in additional funding. It's one of 61 commitments that are already being delivered from the serious violence strategy. Apparently Sajid Javid last week, who's the Home Secretary, chaired the 3rd serious violence task force, where it was announced that teachers in England are going to receive anti-knife crime lesson plans as part of Knife-Free campaign to teach young people the dangers of carrying knives. Now, I have to say that when I look at other publications from the government in other areas, for example, drugs use or sexual education for teenagers and so on, when they're talking about campaigns to teach young people the dangers of drugs or the dangers of sexually transmitted diseases or whatnot, what you tend to find is that those documents, those leaflets, contain information about how to use drugs safely, or how to have safe sex. So is this campaign that's going to be this anti-knife crime lesson plan going to be all about the safe use of knives? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure what this serious violence strategy is all about, whether it's to prevent serious violence or whether it's to encourage it. But we will see. We still expect serious violence on the streets in the not too distant future. But anyway, let's move on to sexual exploitation and abuse in the aid sector. This is the International Development Committee, which has published this report today on the issue of sexual exploitation and abuse in the aid sector. This follows the so-called scandal in Haiti, which is Oxfam, wasn't it? I believe, if I'm correct there. Now, so what they've got a number of suggestions on this. The first is empowerment. The beneficiaries of humanitarian aid should have knowledge and confidence in their rights and how to find help if those rights are threatened or violated. They're talking about reporting. So reports of sexual exploitation and abuse should be proactively sought and responded to robustly. Accountability, a zero tolerance culture they're going to encourage, and they're going to screen. One of the points that they made, Brian, which is really one of the points that we have been making over the years about organizations like Common Purpose or other organizations where there's the potential for people of authority to come into contact with children or vulnerable people, is that this report recognizes that the people that are of a mind to carry out these types of offences are gravitating to the aid sector because they're being sent to foreign countries where people don't speak the same language, where people are in stressful, vulnerable situations, and they can take advantage of that. We're seeing that right across the issue of sexual exploitation and abuse against children and vulnerable adults. This isn't something which is just restricted to the aid sector. But anyway, just before we leave this, Stephen Twigg, who's the chair of the International Development Committee, said that victims and whistleblowers must not end up feeling penalised for speaking out. Humanitarian organisations and the UN cannot continue a culture of denial when confronted with allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse. I would like to know how many times we have to see these types of situations arise before we get past this whole notion of incompetence or a culture of denial or any other excuse that's made for it, and recognise that in fact it's organised criminal activity in many cases.
In which the government is participating. Or...
Absolutely, yes. Another report out from the government today from the Home Office, the economic and social costs of modern slavery. They're saying, well, basically this is what it's up to. When scaling up further to the estimates of all victims, the estimated total costs of modern slavery in the UK fall between £3.3 billion and £4.3 billion. That's the cost to the UK of modern slavery. The range represents the uncertainty associated with the estimate of total victims. So again, this report highlighting the fact that the numbers of people affected by this aren't being properly gathered. Now that 3.3 billion to 4.3 billion is the cost of the British economy. It's not the amount of money that the government is putting into dealing with this problem. And as we've highlighted many times, the amount of money that the government's putting into dealing with this problem is something around £150 million at the moment. And we'll just remind everybody once again that the profits being made through human trafficking and exploitation and modern slavery, about £130 billion a year. So they're not taking this seriously. They continue to not take it seriously.
Because there's good money in it, Mike. Why destroy something that's obviously got good money, good profits? You don't want it to fail. You just have to bat off the flak when people start to realise what it is.
Well, that's absolutely right. So as a result of that report, the Home Office has announced that it's going to launch an independent review of the Modern Slavery Act. This is the act of government where the UK government says that this act puts the UK right at the forefront of dealing with modern slavery. I think this is the national industry, but anyway, so they're going to review that. So Frank Field MP is going to be involved with that, Maria Miller as well. Okay, but the other person that they've got involved with that review is Baroness Butler-Sloss. Now, of course, they tried to get her involved in the independent child abuse inquiry and that didn't last too long. I can't remember why that was.
Simply that the public outcry prevented her from taking up the post. That was the be-all and end-all of it.
But they've managed to find her a job anyway, so that's good.
Well, you keep these people circulating because they're useful. Why are they useful? Well, we could do no better than to jump on to Prince Charles giving his evidence to that independent abuse inquiry, so-called anyway. Now, I'm pleased to say that inews.co.uk has actually printed the whole of his letter. So I've put the address for people at the top of the screen there. If you search inews.co.uk, Prince Charles 19-point letter to child sexual abuse inquiry in full. You can read it in full. I was just going to give you his conclusion, the conclusion paragraph in his letter here.
Just before you do that, this is the letter that he submitted, which wasn't associated with any kind of statement of truth, and he wouldn't actually give any evidence under oath.
That's correct, Mike. Special circumstances for Prince Charles, of course. One rule for the general public and another one for Prince Charles. Let's have a look at his conclusion here. He says, in conclusion, I would like to state that throughout my life, my position has occasionally brought me into contact with prominent people who have subsequently been accused of serious wrongdoing. Rather than rushing to private judgment, I've always taken the view that the judicial process should take its course. I'm then able to ground my opinions in facts tested by law rather than hearsay. In many cases, including two very prominent cases, where are we here, of false accusations last year, this has proved a sensible course. It follows that I ceased contact with Mr. Bull once the judicial process had concluded and he was found guilty of serious offences against young people. My heart goes out to the victims of abuse and I applaud their courage as they rebuild their lives and so often offer invaluable support to others who have suffered. It remains a source of it remains a source, I've got lost there, deep personal regret that I was one of many who were deceived over a long period of time about the true nature of Mr. Bull's activities. That is why I wanted to volunteer the facts in this letter, which I believe to be true, in the hope that they might be able to help your important work. This is a masterful piece of crafted text, Mike, without any question. Encourage people to read the full letter because it just reeks of insincerity, I think. Why special rules for this man? Because he's been a bit too close and he can't explain it all away. So he's given the opportunity to write a personal letter which ends up with this oozing support for victims of child abuse. What has Prince Charles ever done for youngsters, adults that have been through child abuse? Where has he stepped forward to press for help for these children or adults? It hasn't happened.
Well, as far as I know, the only thing he stepped forward to press is the hand of Jimmy Savile.
Well, this is very true. So we better bring that on screen and just remind ourselves that, of course, it was Prince Charles and Camilla that led tributes to Jimmy Savile after he died. So I put in here really how I see it. Me, my mum and dad, my brothers, the palace staff, the police, the Royal Protection Squad. We had no idea at all. Well, one wouldn't, one. No. Okay. And we'll remind ourselves, of course, that Prince Andrew had to admit he'd been foolish over his friendship with paedophile billionaire Jerry Epstein. So he's photographed walking with a man who by that stage was a convicted paedophile, but it was all just a bit of a mistake. I didn't realise he was a convicted paedophile, honest. And the judge threw out the case of that troublesome Virginia Roberts woman. So when it gets a bit close to the royal family, no worries at all because everything's thrown out of court. And I'd also like to remind people that when UK Column informed Prince Andrew's PA that when he was about to visit Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, abuse of youngsters had taken place. Not only did he visit, but he went to one of the workshops where some of the worst abuses had taken place, and he was happy for all of this to appear in the press. So I'm going to say, do we trust the royal family over the issue of the abuse of children? Personally, I think not, and there are a lot of questions still to be answered.
I'm afraid we have to end today with a piece of extremely sad news, and that is that Guy Taylor, the long-time campaigner on constitutional and legal issues, passed away yesterday. Well, we don't have any details yet of what arrangements there might be or what opportunity there is to offer condolences, but at this point in time, that's all we can say. So in a little bit of a tribute to Guy, just after this programme, we'll show some of the talks that he has given at various British Constitution Group events over the last few years, beginning with his first ever one at the conference in 2011. But very sad news, Brian. Yeah,
exceptionally sad. We're waiting to hear more from Guy's family, and we will be able to do more on Guy. He certainly deserves it. Tremendous amount of work that Guy carried out, but very sad. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much to everybody who's joined us today. If you like what UK Column is doing, if you would like to support us, please consider taking out a subscription or making a donation. It's very clear to us that the British government is now extremely worried about the power of alternative media, and not only UK Column, but all and every reliable alternative media site is going to need support in the coming months and the next couple of years. There's no doubt about that. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.